Working here. My name is Kellen Put-Von Gorman. See, you got to escape having to say my maiden name, Bill. You did very well. Put-Von is from Ontario. I am French-Canadian by birth, and I would love to drop that Put-Von. Unfortunately, I'm known professionally for my maiden name still, so I am Put-Von Gorman. I'm the Technical Intelligence Manager for Delphix. I've been there for about a year and a half. Before that, I did work at Oracle. I was there for a couple of years working in their enterprise manager solution, did database as a service, and was known for the AWR warehouse. What is that similar to on the SQL Server side? More like the, more like the DMVs, dynamic management views and functions, all that data, we would centralize it into a warehouse. And I created a front-end app that would take all that performance data and give metric information on the environment versus just looking at a single database, which worked out very well because a lot of people would centralize and look at one database as the problem and find out it was something else on the server entirely. So I was known for that, but I'm a multi-platform DBA. So I've worked in Oracle and SQL Server, MySQL, Sybase, Postgres, Ingress. I mean, you name it, I pretty much worked on it. But I specialize in Oracle and SQL Server. My first database was actually a 7 terabyte SQL Server 7. It was clustered on a compact SAN, NT40. It was a nightmare. I had just gone through my Oracle certification and never been on a database before in my life, and they handed this to me and said, here's your database. So I learned SQL Server the hard way, but I learned from a very good instructor that came on board, and he just was awesome. And I had a great respect for SQL Server as well as the Oracle databases that they gave me, and I've never been biased really against any kind of database environment or OS or anything else. Figured the more I learned, the better I became. But I did specialize in Oracle just because, well, I worked for companies like Enkatech, who put the most Exadatas in anywhere, and Oracle. So I became an Oracle ACE director. I'm now an alumni. And the Oak Table Network, I think they try to say that we're Oracle scientists with a drinking problem, or maybe the databases caused us a drinking problem or something like that. But there's 100 of those or so in the world, and I'm one of the 6 women that belong to that group. And I've won a number of awards as Women in Technology Awards and that because I've been trying to get more women, especially on the Oracle side. You're doing a lot better on the SQL Server side, but trying to get more women within there, even on the ACE group. I think I complained this last week very, very loudly after Oracle Open World that the percentages have gone down. There's only about, I think, 6% women, 5% women in the ACE community out of the 500. And oh, we need more women over there. We do so awesome, and you know, the women that are there are fantastic, but we could definitely add more to the community. And I teach a lot with STEM education. I work with Raspberry Pis with Python, is what I teach kids, and I'll be honest with you, I'm just kind of reliving my childhood. But I do a lot with that, and I'm very involved in my Oracle community as well as SQL Server. I'm the president for the largest regional user group in the US, Rocky Mountain Oracle User Group. For some reason, we're crazy and belong in Denver. And then I'm the liaison for the Denver SQL Server User Group. And I blog and I author and I tweet a lot. So if you follow me as DBA Kevlar on Twitter or anything like that, I apologize up front because I am noisy. But I've blogged a lot, and I have a lot of content out there on my website, dbakevlar.com. And I've got a couple books. Brand new ebook just came out, and they put it in hard copy even. DevOps for the DBA, The Final Frontier. And I really appreciate my company, Delphix, that they've actually published that book recently, since I never seem to have enough time for anything. But without further ado, we'll get into this here. So DevOps is an interesting situation for the database. Seemed like we were the last ones we brought on board. I know I tried to introduce the track into RMUG, my regional user group here in the Oracle side, back in 2012, and it failed miserably. And then I reintroduced it in like 2016, and it went off like gangbusters. So we as DBAs are starting to kind of feel the pain of this, recognize that we need to be part of it. We've been feeling the pressure of development as it goes to operations, and we know those middle of the night situations after things have been released to production that we're responsible for. And as you can see here, this is kind of the official Wikipedia definition of what DevOps is, you know, that combination, the development and operations and the collaboration and communication, and how important that is. And it does derive from both of it. And DevOps, for DBAs, we have a foot kind of firmly in both. I know I myself have done a lot of development in my work. I've had the role of developer as much as DBA in my career. And there is a high focus on collaboration. Culture is as important to it as it is with collaboration in the development and automation methodologies that we pick up. And the goal is, more than anything else, is around releases, making sure that they're successful and that they have less bugs and that they happen more frequently, because it has to move at the speed of business. So how are we as DBAs impacted by DevOps? I mean, it's pretty obvious, I think, for a lot of people, but I myself didn't realize that I had been working in DevOps for years as a DBA. I had been, kind of heavily involved in this idea of automation and automating anything that I had to do more than once, and to find tools that helped people do their jobs better. And we're heavily influenced by just the decisions that are being made at all times. We don't like bleeding edge. We don't like high risk. Anything that's high risk, of course, talks about impact. I mean, that results in impact to the production systems, accessibility for the customers. And that's a big deal for us. We're not too crazy about it. With the introduction of the cloud, this became even a more interesting scenario for us, where before we may have to worry about a certain business unit and that having extra funds, and they would buy a server and let a developer build something that would end up becoming production and become our responsibility. With the introduction of the cloud, this took on a whole new level. All of a sudden, we had developers opening cloud accounts, developing something that fit a business need, and suddenly, again, we were responsible for it. I mean, this took this out of, just kind of shot it out like a cannon, and we were responsible for this. So DevOps again became this responsibility to then introduce and include the cloud, and that demand increased. It increased risk, it increased the need for DBAs to become responsible for this, and at times we also were viewed as much of a roadblock to this, and that's why you're seeing more and more cloud companies really embrace the developer, because they realize that they will use the cloud more readily than the DBAs, who are going to be a little bit more risk aversive. We want to see what it is. We want to see why we should use it. We have to be proven. We have to have it justified. And yet those DBA skills are one of the most in demand when it comes to DevOps engineers. I just finished building out curriculum for a DevOps initiative towards recruiters and how to find strong DevOps engineer candidates. And some of the biggest demands for DevOps engineers came from the DBA role. So when you start looking at the history of DevOps and where they came from, it started out in an Agile 2008 conference. Andrew Clay Schaefer and Patrick Dubois, they discussed Agile infrastructure and what was required for that role in supporting it. The term DevOps was coined and popularized in a series of DevOps days that started in 2009 in Belgium. This hasn't been around that long. It's very much in its infancy. And like I said, I introduced this pretty early on, but it didn't take off well in the DBA community. And now we're seeing DevOps abstracts and DevOps sessions that are being introduced like gangbusters in every single one of the conferences. It has become a reality. It is where we live now. And what is our relationship to this? I mean, we have to admit that we are an integral part of this. We are connected completely to the DevOps role. There's no way for us to separate from it, especially because of our position. But at the same time, we can't confuse the two when we start talking about what Agile is. Many people use these terms very interchangeably between Agile and DevOps, and yet they're different. Agile has to do with development, where DevOps has to do with the combination and collaboration between development and operations. Where Agile is a focus on culture and how changing the development cycle. DevOps has to do with organizational changes to ensure and create success. DevOps uses that success to actually create a scoring method to say, were we successful in the way we've made changes with Agile? The introduction to Agile may mean that we're moving at a very fast pace. With the introduction of DevOps, does it mean that we're moving at a fast pace but also successful? So some of these common terms that you're going to be hearing as we go along, and the main thing to remember is that these aren't the only terms you're going to be hearing. Because this is in its infancy, because many of these are open source tools, they're open source methodologies, that there's a number of different terms that are being used even for Agile development. These terms here can change a little bit depending on the office, the shop, but they all pretty much fulfill these same things. And you're going to hear Agile, of course, but build automation versus configuration management, continuous delivery, rapid deployment. You may hear continuous integration, functional testing versus unit testing versus test-driven development, or TDD, lean and scrum, monitoring versus alerting, packages, containers, and virtualizations, which is a powerful area of this that definitely encompasses the DBA and the database realm. Release coordination and orchestration. So we'll jump right in and we'll start with build automation. Build automation is the process of automating the creation of software builds and the associated processes, including compiling computer source code into binary code, packaging that binary code, and then running these automated tests. DBAs are a natural fit for this. Our history with scripting and automation experience or backups and monitoring and alerting. You think about this, we are just the right person to kind of fulfill this. We have natural scripting capabilities that mean that we're going to be able to automate builds in a way, as well as have access to production to create those builds that make sense. Start looking into the actual cycle. It's a system engineering process for establishing and maintaining consistency of a product's performance, functional as well as physical attributes with its requirements, design, and operational information throughout the life expectancy of a software project. Here, as we desire routines that result in an expected outcome. So you can start seeing the cycle and make sure that it's kind of a feedback loop that will continue on. The next is continuous delivery, also sometimes called as CI, continuous integration. DBAs are much slower to embrace continuous delivery. I think we see this as being very high risk, but for most software engineers approach this with kind of this team produced software. They look at it as incremental updates to an application in production. It's pretty straightforward and it's a repeatable deployment process. They see it as a very important part of, business receiving what they need on a regular basis. And again, DBAs may be much slower at accepting this and is much more high risk. And another one that's a little bit riskier and not as embraced as much by the DBA. They can be extremely adverse to it because it's seen as high risk, but at the same time, it can be seen as lower risk by developers because they may see it, the software content enablement and service, but it's all into a smaller focus area. They're not going to do it as an entire tier or multiple tiers within a spectrum that they're going to release to, but just a small little piece that they're going to deploy. And they can deploy this very rapidly. Next piece is release coordination and orchestration. It's the use of tools like Excel release, software releases from development stages to the actual software release itself. A demand for these release tools has become very high. We're seeing new tool sets each day that are coming out into the market, and people are feeling more comfortable with them and bringing them in. The main thing to always remember as part of DevOps is that just by having a set of tools, you don't have DevOps. DevOps is more than the tools itself. It has to do with that culture and that collaboration and communication that has to be part into this. But as we start looking at each one of these, you start to recognize that it is a puzzle that has to be whole for you to get the complete picture. And of course, what many of us are very familiar with is source and version control. Source and version control, we are all pretty familiar with. We have to check in our software and make sure that it's checked in and that there's version control in each release so that we can find out when something has gone wrong, that we can back out to the previous version. One of the things that we're starting to see now is data version control. People realizing that with the source code control and change of scripts and procedures, especially on the SQL Server side, when you start talking about procedures being changed, that the data may change as well. And to be able to check in data changes as part of the source control is a new way of looking at things. And that's something that we'll also talk about as we go forward. And when we start talking about all of this, we have to recognize the goals for each are the same. Our goal is shorter delivery cycles. There are higher success rate of those releases, shorten the time to address issues, continued improvement in the communications as well as collaboration, and increased revenue for the business. If we're not bringing about productivity changes and increased revenue for the companies, I mean, we have to really question why we would even do it to begin with. And the next step is we get into virtualization. Virtualization is something that most people don't look at, but it's because the database is kind of this roadblock. Data is big. It has a lot of gravity. When we start talking about data gravity and the weight of data, it's quite large. In computing, virtualization can, but when we start talking about a virtual version or a device resource, you know, when we talk about servers and storage and devices, networks, we can also talk about a database. And a virtual database can be very powerful because that means you can provide a lot of databases with very little storage, very little resource use versus waiting days or weeks. The framework divides the resources in one or more execution environments. For data, this can result in a golden copy or a source that is used for centralized locations and removal of the duplicated data. While duplicates are kept for singular. So there's many types of virtualization when we start talking about this. And because I work for DevOps, of course, I'm going to that are out there. You're going to hear about different ones from like Redgate. You're going to hear ones from Windocs. They can create SQL clones as well. But clone powerful, and that's something important for you to understand as you get into DevOps, because otherwise people are waiting, they find about 80% of their time for their copies of their data. So if we take a copy of a database, and we're going to say our source is 1 terabyte on our production system, and we create through an engine that's going to take from your backup files and create a virtual golden copy, and it's compressed and deduped, so you're now down to about 600 gigs. And this can also be your application tier, not just your database. You can do this for your application, any other data sources, so big data, anything like that. You're going to bring it down, compress it, virtualize it, and then you can create as many environments that you need. Now, keep in mind, you can do this in just a matter of minutes. It may take a little bit longer if you have postscripts that need to be run on it. Let's say you want to reset sequences, reset passwords, run a couple different scripts, change some different things on it. You can do all of that, but they're all read and write. They're all unique copies. 80% of that data is all the same, so they can go back to the golden copy, but each one of the blocks that are unique to each one of those, they're going to look just the same as any other physical database when you're looking in your management studio, etc. But you're not going to need all of the space that you may have needed to begin with. So each one of this is going to fit in the same space. So instead of having 5, or 10 terabytes to create 5 or 10 copies, you're only going to need 1 terabyte, because each one of these databases are going to need maybe 5 gigs instead of 1 terabyte each, because the read and write copies are going to keep going back to the golden source for most of its read. So this is why it's different, is that one, we know as DBAs we're only as good as our last backup. So this way we get to check our backups. We're recovering from it on a regular basis to create all these virtual databases. You're not going to be used more archaic tools, so BCPs and other exports, import tools. You get to use newer technologies that allow you to do a lot more with a lot less. You're going to use this with DevOps tools. So you could use this with Jenkins. You could use this with container technologies. You can use this with full scripting. You're going to be able to automate all of this through scripting, which is pretty cool. You also have a GUI that you can do this through, and that's very important when you start talking about most of these virtualization products. They allowed that. And we also have products that are self-service tools. So if you start talking about a developer, that's extremely important, that they can actually dial back data changes that they've made and redo tests or redo development when something goes wrong. That is incredibly powerful for them. So start thinking about this as we go back through our DevOps tools, that we're also talking about DevOps tools that make the DBA part of the solution. You are not part of that roadblock. And when I'm talking about roadblock, here's what we're talking about in a timeline to a project. So a waterfall approach, when we're moving from waterfall to Agile, all of these red blocks are the time that is being waited upon to recover a database. And we're talking about 1 terabyte larger databases. This can take extensive amount of time. Moving backup files to where they need to be recovered to, getting the space you need. It's never about just one thing. We all know there's a lot of friction involved here. So for this solution, we're going to go from that waterfall approach where people are doing their testing, their development in small periods of time with the releases, and may even have to skip development and test cycles because they're waiting for the data to be refreshed, to going to a more agile approach, which you see in the bottom, where you're able to refresh the database in very short periods of time, sometimes minutes, and then do a majority of the times to your development and your testing and release. And you can release a lot more often and a lot quicker, which will produce more revenue for your company. The next piece of this is to start talking about containers and packages. So when you start thinking about how you actually release things, you rarely release just to the database or just to the application. It's often in multi-tiers. So when you create packages and containers and you deploy in that manner, you're able to release in the same way or deploy in the same way that you're releasing your code. And if you create a container and able to move it, this allows you to move it in this multi-hybrid environment that most of us are living in. Most of us are on, we found 60% of our customers actually are on 2 to 5 clouds each. So even if they're in the same kernel or different kernels, we're able to create packages or containers. And you're going to see this again from companies like Windocs, and you see this from Delphix, where we're able, we call them data pods, by the way. We're able to create these containers and move them along with your application, your big data files, your, unformatted data, whatever you have. You create one container and you can move it from cloud to cloud or on-prem to the cloud. These are very important for DBAs to start embracing and to recognize there. How this works when you're looking at it in an environment is that, let's say we're looking at Windows because we're looking at SQL Server, and yes, I know we're also into the Linux market now with SQL Server, but we would take our application, our data files, everything that we need, our database, and we could take an rsync or a robocopy, and we would put it through the Delphix engine, and we would create a container, a data pod, and then we would be able to move that as many times as we need to create as many copies that we need. And this includes to the cloud. And we could deploy this using like Jenkins plugins. And this means that this is automated, because anybody who thinks that they're going to do this, manually, do this through a GUI, nah, we're going to use this through scripts, and you're going to be able to deploy this as many times as you want. You're going to be able to move this from cloud to cloud through scripting. My partner in crime there, Adam Bowen, has a great video of this where he shows how he moves stuff from Amazon to Azure and back and forth as many times as you want. So this is pretty darn cool. But this is across NFS, iSCSI, whatever you're connected to. We speed it up. We use first tier storage to make sure that it's very, very fast. And you can connect to it, and you're not going to see the performance weights on it. Latency, of course, is connected to I/O and network weights. So you always look at your connectivity and the resources that you're utilizing, but you're going to be able to move this as many times as you want. And you're going to be able to do this very fast. You're going to be able to do this at the speed of the business that you're looking at to do. The next piece is for the developers again and the testers. We have to admit that this is a term that not many of us are as familiar with. Bookmarking, branching, this is something that developers do. The ability to mark each iteration in that development with a bookmark is important. Developers, as they're releasing code, they will go through and they need an interface that allows them to bookmark each time they make a change in one of these containers, not just to the code, but also to the database tier, the data itself, the application tier. Have I released new code, new files to this? It simplifies and locks. It allows them to get a consistent image at the database tier as well. If something goes wrong, it allows them to actually roll back in the time flow. Everything, instead of having to create rollback scripts of a release that's gone wrong, something goes very drastically wrong, it destroys that image. They don't have to go back to the DBA and say, can you refresh my database image? I just screwed it up. Or I need to back out these scripts. Can you do this too? And how can we schedule this? It makes it a lot simpler. And the way that this looks for them is something like our product here. This is Jetstream. I really like this image because it does show you how all of this is working. But the way that this would work is that you would have your version 1.1. This is for our release that we just made. And as they go along, even though each one of these lines that you're seeing here, you could recover back to and roll back just by moving a slider, you could also bookmark any of these. So you can say, here, I want to remind myself that I released a whole bunch of code into my container. And the container on here, not that you can see it, but in this dev environment, there is a database, the employee application, some big data files, all of this is attached to here, and it all has pointers to it. So as changes are made to any of this, all of this can be bookmarked. We can also branch to it. So if you want to do a new branch and say, all of this was successful, we're releasing to production. Now we start over with branch 1.3 and go forward some more. But this allows for a developer to release and change. And the way that this looks is, and it's going to look very confusing for most developer or most DBAs, is that we can see this from our tier, which is we see it from the above the top area. We make bookmarks and say version 1. Here's a release for FY16 and da 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 da. We go forward and we make bookmarks to the application, the database tier, everything. That container is bookmarked. What it looks like to the developer are all these different complex changes. But if anything goes wrong, they can actually take a little time flow, a little slider, and move back and undo all these different changes that are being made in their environment. And it simplifies it, makes it much easier. They don't have to involve all the DBAs and the developers. The DBAs can get back to their job that they need to be addressing, which a lot of times is database management, cloud management, code reviews, things that they really should be paying more attention to than just recovering some data out of a system because a development process went wrong or a test didn't go as planned. And these systems should be very mature. That's one of the things that's really crucial when we start talking about all of this. The maturity of a DevOps environment will decide how siloed your environment is. Some shops, you may do all of this. For other shops, it may be that you just have a standard role as a DBA or the release manager, or you may just be a developer. But it's very important to understand that as DevOps starts to take over, as DevOps seems to mature in different shops, you may just do individual pieces of this. And where that comes into then is into practices and tools. And we'll start out by talking about methods. So we'll have methods like Scrum, Kanban, Extreme Programming, Continuous Delivery. We'll have hybrid approaches of those that have come out in different smaller shops as well as larger ones where they call Scrum Ban and Kanban plan. Then we have tools that are used for collaboration like Jira, Slackstorm, Pivotal Tracker, HipChat. And of course, we have now Agile Central. And then we can talk about deployment tools like Rapid Deploy and Elastibox and Juju. We may talk about a lot, which really goes back into the DBA realm, which is automation tools like Jenkins and Chef and Ansible. I also like using Terraform. You also have build tools like Maven, Gradle, Make, Packer, MS Build. These are extremely important when you start talking about build tools for the automation and the orchestration, the deployment tools. They talk about documenting and lessons learned. All of these products are part of DevOps, but you as a DBA may only be responsible for pieces of these. So let's start with methodologies, and especially with Agile methodologies. We can start with Scrum. Scrum is very lightweight. It focuses on features, bug fixes, backlog debt. The service serves very large teams, including those that have over 800. Then you get into like Lean and Kanban, which I can't say today. Lean's goal is to eliminate all the waste, over demand on resources, and the ability to deliver faster and more effectively each time. Next is like Extreme Programming. XP is one of the most controversial due to its ability to deliver even to large companies every 1 to 3 weeks. It's a very disciplined approach. At the same time, it can seem very dangerous for somebody like a DBA. And then you got stuff like Crystal, and Crystal is often known like under colors like Crystal Clear, Crystal Yellow, Crystal Orange, and others. And then you got feature-driven deployment, also known as FDD. It's a client and architecture-centric software deployment, and it focuses on feature deliverables. So if we start with Scrum, what is Scrum? So Scrum is a framework. It's an Agile framework. The product owner is also called a Scrum Master. I know I went through my Scrum Master training years and years ago. They go on sprints, and sprints are usually within 2 weeks. That's the standard time of it. And you have stand-ups every morning, and stand-ups are to get everybody kind of on task, you know, who you're working with that day. A Scrum stand-up should not be a half an hour meeting. They're commonly only about 5 minutes. And you go through what is expected that day, who you'll be working with, and you get on with your day. The Scrum Master sometimes is also the DevOps engineer, and they keep that team focused. They make sure that everybody's collaborating throughout the day, and their whole job is to get the backlog down. That is going to be their whole job for the day. Their goal is to get that product released within that 2 weeks, and the product release is on that framework, that backlog pieces that they put together for the sprint. And the sprint ends with feedback and lessons learned, and then they go on to the next sprint. And the way that this looks, an actual Scrum sprint is something like this. So you have your product backlog. You do your sprints planning, which decides what backlog pieces that you will go on to, what debt is there that needs to be added. You have your daily sprints along with your stand-ups. You do a burn down chart. The burn down chart is what have you gotten off your backlog. That's the whole goal of it. And then you do a review, your lessons learned, you get your release, and then you start over again. The next is Lean and Kanban. And Lean is really interesting. A lot of DBAs have found this really helpful because it's an approach that's a little bit more visual. A lot of people do it through, and I kid you not, through sticky notes. They create a whiteboard and say, this is what we need to accomplish. And they start writing, moving these notes around about what they're going to take on this week. It uses standardized cues, very much refined processes. I've seen this happen even at our company kickoff. The product services team decided to get together, professional services team got together, and they put sticky notes all around the board. And they started going through about what they wanted to accomplish in this year, and started working with teams, building teams around them. You're going to take on this. Here's your sticky note. You go into this team. You get this done. And it's really intriguing on how they build this work process out. They build out the workflows, and it's all about continuous improvement. There's a feedback loop that happens all the time as they work through this. And this is kind of what it looks like. So you will have a to-do, what you're working on, and what's done. And you will continue to try to get everything from left to right. So very different from the shift left that you're hearing as the cloud moves. The next, and this is my favorite, extreme programming. And no, not that extreme. Extreme programming, it came back from coders that wanted to move faster and get more done. At the same time, most DBAs are a little concerned about this. It's written in pairs. It's all about peer programming. They get together. It's usually at 2, at least 3 sometimes. But it's all about the power of doing, a lot of planning, and they talk about failing fast. They expect failure, but they expect also to fail early. So it should be done at the development layer. If it gets up to test, they usually feel that they did fail at that point and they need to improve upon their processes. They always build foundations that can be built on later and as they go ahead. They rarely specialize, so everyone is a developer, everyone tests, everyone designs. This is an army of one kind of process, and it's become pretty popular in startups and smaller shops. Is not as popular in robust, larger companies, and it's something definitely to keep in mind. And what does XP look like at a glance? This is how they do this. Kind of, they build out their stories, their iteration planning. They start to iterate. They do the testing and the development at the same time. They're doing all of this. So keeping in mind that while they're doing programming, they may have one of the users in the area with them while they're programming it to also test it, collaborate, and make sure that what they're working on actually meets what the user wants. So instead of getting kind of your requirements early on and saying, oh, is this what you wanted in the end product? I'm going, that's not really it. They may work very collaboratively through the development and the testing process. And then they'll do a customer approval at the end, and they'll do the small releases. The next we get into is Crystal. And as I said, Crystal often is identified by colors. So it's all about this family of human-powered adaptive. It's very ultra-light. They may build out their methodologies to build that business, so it's one-offs. It is very different from Scrum. Keep that in mind, and it's very lightweight. There is little documentation, so I am not a fan of Crystal. I've never been one. The overhead management is real light, which is cool. But there's very little reporting, so I find very little lessons learned, and I just have never been crazy about it. I think it works best in small teams, but again, it's a very unique piece. So for me, I have not had a lot of success with Crystal. And then you get into feature-driven development. As you can see by this design here, feature-driven development, it's more like rapid deploy. It's very focused on delivering one feature at a time. And it's really popular with those that are doing small releases. Toyota has been very popular with this. They've done up to 300 releases a day, working off of feature-driven development, so keep that in mind. But it's a very interesting concept, and it's another one that's very focused on a kind of an army of one process, where you will focus on one little feature. You're going to build this out, you test it, you deploy it, and you get the approval from that end user. After all of that, we're going to start moving into DevOps tools for the DBAs. And these are tools that are going to be more along what you're going to be working with as a database administrator. After learning all of that, you're going to see most of those tools aren't here on this list. And what you're seeing is some of the more popular ones, such as GitHub, which of course everybody uses. And if you haven't created a GitHub account, definitely do that. Start checking in your code. I have to admit that I am guilty and behind of checking in all my code from my website on the GitHub. I've been using it mostly for projects, but definitely consider that if you haven't. It's a great place to keep your scripts. Chef, and we start talking about Terraform and Ansible and Puppet. These are definitely products that we all use for automation deployments to ensure that we're able to move as fast as the Agile development is. Kubernetes and Docker, when we start talking about being able to containerize your environments. Delphix as well, when we start talking about data pods and being more data-centric products. We talk about collaboration with Jira. We start talking about cloud with Amazon, as well as, of course, Azure, which is missing off of here, which is terrible. But all of these are tools that you as the DBA will be more in line with working with. And this is something that I would love to show you. This is the periodic DevOps table. And if you have not seen this, I'm going to show this to you real quick. And the reason is because it is an interactive website. I like to make sure people, let me get this real quick. If I can get everything to cooperate today. And what's cool about this site is if you're just learning about DevOps tools, this is from ZBA Labs, and it is incredibly interactive. You're able to look at DevOps tools and go by category, go by the actual option. Is it open source? Is it free, freemium, paid, enterprise? As you can see, most of the database ones are enterprise level. Are they for build, collaboration, security? It is completely interactive. And if you click on one, like let's say, click on Git, it will then take you to their page about it and give you information about the tool itself, as well as links to their website. And obviously everybody's gone to the site at the same time. But it'll give you a little bit of information so you can learn about these tools, further your knowledge outside of this session. So I do highly recommend it. And if you go to Google and just look up periodic table of DevOps tools, it'll come up. Trust me, this is one of the most popular ones that I recommend. But I will also have links to other ones, but keep this in mind and you can take a look at it. And I'm not going to go any farther into this because it's still thinking through. But please consider going out to this link down here and check this out. It is a great one to do. And we'll go back to here. But this will provide you a lot of information about DevOps tools, and you can learn all about these even outside of this session. But we'll go into a few of them. We'll start with Ansible, and Ansible is pretty cool. You get to learn about playbooks, which is how they build out their automation. It allows you to build out all the plays within a playbook and consists of all those lists of tasks, and you use YAML for the syntax. Security configurations are based on hosts and users, so you set this all up within the system, and you can run even for secondary users. So you do have privilege escalation, and they have a huge support community along with best practices. It really is extremely mature. It's been in use for years through DBAs as well as the DevOps community, so you don't have to worry about kind of sitting out there open source and feeling that you don't have any support. The example of an Ansible call, so you can see what the script looks like this. Doesn't look that different from what you're already aware of. And like I said, there's a huge user community out there, and you can learn how to call your shell scripts as well as PowerShell scripts and be able to do everything you want. This one, of course, is a shell script because you can see we've changed the permissions on the shell script to read write on everything. But this is really interesting in how you actually call all of this, and it will automate everything that you're doing. Next, we're going to go into Jenkins, and Jenkins is another one. Ant is another Java-based built tool that's part of the Apache open source project. It's similar to Make and written in XML, but these are really, really cool products. These are important for you to understand as a DBA, because you're going to find more and more companies using these. It has easy access versus a URL, so you do have a user interface to work with on this. There are tons of plugins. We have a plugin for Delphix, so I can tell you, I mean, this does exist. I can even show it to you here in a second. And it's got support for multiple scripting languages, which is important these days. One of the things you'll learn with DevOps is that it's a very heterogeneous community, and instead of forcing people to use one tool, they expect to use multiple tools, so they try to make sure that you have that. It does have revision control built into it, so you can use CVS and Subversion, things like that. And the notifications can be used with, like, you know, send mail and all of that, and Qmail and that. And you use Groovy. Groovy is pretty cool. Come on, that's a great name for this. And you'll see similarities here to what you were just seeing with the actual YAML script for Ansible. This is very, very common. The languages, the syntax is very, very similar for each one of these, but this is their Groovy script example. And this would be a call here to run that script, and tells you where the directory is, and then to call it, and are you going to start it, stop it, etc., etc. And this is kind of what the plugin is here. We can download this, manage. This is from the Jenkins website, and you can even download the Jenkins plugin for Delphix. And then the next one is Puppet. And Puppet, you're able to review, deploy, invest in all of your software. There's a lot of pieces to Puppet. It's very similar to Chef and Jenkins, and you can share and test and force changes on premise and in the cloud. There's a lot of new stuff from Puppet that's been coming out that people have been playing around with. They've just been doing an awesome job, and as a DBA, you're going to see a lot more of this in the upcoming future. And then we get into containers with Docker. You know, OS virtualization is important even at that OS level. There's a lot of resources here, and you're able to do resource level isolation at the kernel level. You'll hear a lot of this from Oracle as well as SQL Server in the upcoming future with KVM, so kernel level virtual machines. And the technologies such as the overlay VFS, these file systems are incredibly important. They allow for containers and remove a lot of the overhead in other VM technology. But there are Docker alternatives. Remember that Docker should not be isolated, that means containers. It does not. There's OCI, there's Kubernetes, CoreOS, Apache Mesos, as well as some of the other ones that you're seeing here. And then we get into GitHub. Like I said, I've been bad about GitHub. I've got a couple projects out there, but I haven't put my scripts out there. All my scripts are still sitting out on Google Drive, and it's not really the right choice. GitHub, you can use these and have your scripts out there. It was started by Linus Torvalds, and it's just the right way to do things, and there's just a lot of stuff out there. But there are alternatives as well. There's Subversion, CVS, Mercurial. So keep that in mind when we talk about Git and GitLab and all these other ones. And it's easy to actually create a repository. You can do it in like 2 minutes at the most. And you can see here, you can create a public or a private repository. So if you have some work that you don't want public yet, no problem at all, create a repository, start to look at your version control, and don't have to worry about losing stuff as you're working along. And once you create it, this is what an example of an actual repository looks like. So know your tools. There is an incredible variation of tools, but know that tools do not mean DevOps. It's important to understand them, but it doesn't mean that all the tools are alike. Knowing that periodic table of DevOps tools is very powerful, because you're going to find as you even research them, just like looking at the database tier, that was actually release version that all of those DevOps tools are combined with for the database tier. And what I thought was really interesting is that, Redgate is a competitor to my tool, but when we start looking at like DataCal and some of the others, they're actually partners with us. So keep that in mind as you start to compare one tool to another. And from the DBA perspective, start considering what you want to do with your future. We realize that backups, refreshing of databases, a lot of those mundane tasks for DBAs is going away. You're going to be much more valuable if you learn automation, if that you start to enhance your scripting skills. Not only PowerShell, but with the introduction to Linux with SQL Server, you're going to need to learn Bash and KShell. This is pretty much the world of most Oracle DBAs. It's going to be for the SQL Server as well. Understand that it's not just the database, that it'll be multi-data stores, multi-database platforms, that the data is a bottleneck because of its sheer size, and being able to virtualize it is extremely crucial. VMs, containers, all of that is going to be part of your job. And recognizing that a heterogeneous tools, not just scripting, is going to be important. So recognizing and learning some of these tools for multi-tier technologies is going to be part of your job. Understand that automation doesn't really lessen your value. We may have said, well, it's going to take me a week to refresh this data, but is it really a week of value? Find that there's more important things that you can be doing. And embracing those new skills, it does add value to the business, not just your career. That you're able to do more things for the company, that they understand a little bit better. We may not have so many people scratching their head when they try to figure out what a DBA does. And as a final summary, update your skills. Learn the scripting, monitoring, automating to remove bottlenecks, enhance the monitoring utilities and the infrastructure and development to an overall view. I know that I myself spent a long time with Enterprise Manager, which is kind of similar to your Management Studio, probably more to, what else? More like, gosh, my brain went completely blank. Janice Griffin's project. SQL Sentry, things like that. Products that start to take the cloud into consideration, that are starting to look more at DevOps, that are starting to look more at multi-tier infrastructure tools. Those are going to be something that DBAs need to start becoming more aware of, that you're going to become more of a database engineer, more of a cloud engineer. These are extremely crucial, and that other people will become more development and data analytics along with their database tier skills, as well as DevOps engineer skills. And that data is everywhere. I mean, it really is the bottleneck, as well as just it's an asset, and we need to be able to manage this. So recognize that you're an integral part of the solution as you play into DevOps and data ops, as we call it, that next tier into DevOps, and that there is definitely a crucial place for you within the industry in the upcoming years. And with that, I'd like to thank you, and I've tried to leave some time for questions. I think we have about 8 minutes here. And my connectivity, my connection information is here. If you see my Twitter handle and my email and that, and I hear people coming off of mute. So any questions?
Kellen, that was only me coming off of mute.
Wanted to check.
That's fine. Let's see here. And I'm going to try to pop this out. I have, what's his name? Garrett is asking, any suggestion on where to focus training time and money?
Anything on cloud certifications, of course, Azure and Amazon. I love Azure. I do speak a lot on the Oracle circuit, so of course everybody's like Amazon this, Oracle Cloud this. Azure is impressive. Azure's done a great job. So get your cloud certifications in. For the DBAs, definitely learn shell scripting, not just PowerShell, but K-Shell and Bash. It's going to be very powerful. The ability for us to script out and automate a lot of this is something that most programmers, developers don't have. They are learning also Python and R. As we see, Python is the way of the world, and Python is so easy to learn. If you're thinking about getting into JavaScript or JSON or anything else, learning Python first is an easy step getting into that, I would say.
Okay. I guess I'll ask a question. How, and this just, how would you equate the differences to this? I'm a little older, so I started back a long time ago. And how would you equate the differences of this to organic development, shall we say, versus DevOps? Organic or rapid development?
I'm one of those DBAs. My favorite DBA to work with, honestly, was very much a developer. He was very happy being in the corner working alone. And DevOps has a lot to do with communication and collaboration. I was one that had the strong communication skills. People would come to me, they didn't talk to him. DevOps, you need to have those communication and collaboration skills. You need to want to work with others. If you're happier being in a corner, just developing, it may not be the realm for you. You may be happier in more of a traditional cloud administrator role that will encompass a lot of those still traditional DBA tasks. And I think that's extremely important for anybody who's doing this development to understand. If you're not enjoying being around people, if you don't want to do that collaboration and communication, it's going to be more difficult. That said, there are so many different sizes of shops. There's going to be ones that have more siloed positions that say, all you're going to do is create these automation scripts. You don't need to talk to anyone. We've got a Scrum Master who does this. So keep that in mind. It's still a very open field. It's still in its infancy. Does that answer that question? Because I think it is a difficult question for me to kind of wrap around DevOps.
Yeah, it does answer my question. I have some others here that I'm going to look at. Somebody's asking, Hemeth is asking several questions here. He has a question apart from K-Shell and Bash. What's the immediate that we should go for? I guess what's the immediate, I think what he's asking is what should we focus on learning besides K-Shell and Bash?
Yeah. Language-wise, as I said, Python, R, analytics is going to be a big deal because right now we're using less than 1% of the data that we're pulling in. Accessing it, using it, everything. So analytics is a big deal, and all of you guys know that. I mean, we're seeing the the Power BI sessions come up left and right. I mean, analytics tools are going like crazy. So for us to be able to help in that area, because I mean, I always felt as a DBA, the more I knew about the database and the data, the more powerful I was. I understood whenever there was a poor plan. I understood what data was hit most. To be able to assist in that area is really, I think, going to be a cornerstone of where analysis needs to go. I will also tell you, big data has the same challenge that relational databases have. Most of the big data folks are constantly feeling the pain of trying to get data to test with and just cross their fingers that it's going to run in production. I mean, they are constantly feeling that pain point. So we as DBAs are going to find that our skill set is surprisingly needed in the big data area too. So don't be afraid of big data. Learn Hive, learn Pig, learn, Kafka. Kafka and blockchain are huge. The more you can learn about it, the better.
All right. Hemeth says thank you. I believe that answered his question. Well, I don't see any other questions. So, Kellen, first of all, thank you for not making me pronounce your maiden name. And
You're welcome.
it was very much an honor to have you. I appreciate it, and we hope to have you again
Thank you.
sometime soon. And
Thank you. It was wonderful.
thank you. And somebody else here said that thank you, great presentation. This is being recorded. I will make the recordings available on YouTube. And Kaylin, you'll have, I assume you have these slides maybe linked on your website, or if you want to send them to me, I can make them available as well.
I'll send them to you. Absolutely.
That's perfect. Well, thank you so much, everybody. I appreciate your time, and I hope to see you guys soon in about a month, and I'll get the schedule out shortly.
Thank you, everyone.